everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Reading Party podcast with Megan and Lexi. This episode continues our season looking at modern retellings of the Iliad and the Odyssey, ancient epics known for both brutal violence and instances of sexual assault. This episode is not suitable for under 18s. We hope you have your favourite beverage and snack ready to go, because we've got our teas and are ready to start spilling the tea on our latest ancient story. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Reading Party podcast. This week we're going over the 2004 movie Troy, which is probably known most famously because it stars Brad Pitt as Achilles. So what did you think of the movie?
This is the maybe 10th, 11th, 12th time I've seen it. You know, it never ceases to entertain me, is what I'll say.
It's an entertaining watch. This is, for me, I think only the second time. But it's a fun Hollywood blockbuster type movie. It's entertaining, definitely.
It's doing its job and being entertaining, but historically accurate, not
so much.
Not so much. But it's funny because it's like there are some like tiny details that I feel like they did get right, which is why I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
What bugged you the most then?
I'll start with the biggest part of all, which is when we introduce Sparta, essentially. My biggest problem is that you have the scene that says Port of Sparta, and then they cut right into essentially like the big feasting hall. And I was like, so that would lead one to believe that it's right next to the port. And I was like, but did they know that Githio was like the nearest port, but it's also like 40 miles away from Sparta? So it bothers me when it says like when you see water.
Right, and then that kind of crops up again when Helen and Paris leave, because it's like they just snuck out of the palace down to the port. It works for the narrative, and because it's a movie, they don't want to like have 2 days horseback journey before they get to the port, but also it's a little off. Also, Helen and Paris really, really annoy me. And the whole Paris continually through the movie, he starts out being, you must come with me and I will fight for you. And then it's very, I can't have people dying for me. I'm like, well, honey, you should have thought about that before you kidnapped the queen of Sparta, whose husband's brother is like the biggest warmonger in all of the Mediterranean. Maybe consider that first. I know you're like 12, but also have some goddamn self-awareness. And then he gets the chance to fight and end it, and he fucking runs away. And then is all, oh, pity me, everybody thinks I'm a coward, and I just gave up my pride. And Helen's like, oh, it's okay, honey. It's okay. I'm like, no, it's not okay. Goodness. Sorry.
Well, there was that great line where she was like, I don't want a hero. I just want someone I can grow old with. I'm like, okay, in the history of all Greek mythology and just Greek culture, when did a woman not want like a strong man who would be there to like defend her honor and fight for her? Like no one was like, oh, I'm in it to like live a long time and, you know, be like, you know, 60, 70. They're all like, no, we want glory. So I don't know. I was like, that line was so out of place. Well, I do want to mention, because there's going to be a lot of things that we find are not accurate and bad. So I do want to also say there are some good things in this film. And one of them is that I love the relationship between Odysseus and Achilles, because they did get that right. Because Odysseus was sort of the Achilles whisperer, and they had such a playful, sort of bantery relationship. Starting when you knew it was love when he threw a spear at his head. I mean, there's a tree in front, but like, it was still...
Right. And Odysseus is just like, it's Achilles, it's a Tuesday, we're fine, we'll just keep going. And I mean, really, any movie that involves Sean Bean is okay in my book.
Did you notice that he has such a long history of every character he plays dies, and yet he's the only high-ranking Greek official to survive at the end?
Who makes it, yeah.
I was like, all his friends do instead.
This is like his one glorious moment where he doesn't die horribly.
Yeah. Although that's one of my biggest complaints. Okay, not only are my complaints that a bunch of people die who don't die. I mean, Menelaus doesn't die. Agamemnon doesn't die. I mean, they do die, but like later, not here in Troy. But like, okay, so they die, and okay, so yes, then you have Patroclus and Achilles and Hector dying, which is true. But then I think I was annoyed by the lack of like central characters that are in the poem.
Yeah.
Like I put here right on my notes and I like highlighted and underlined it. I was like, there's no Diomedes, there's no Penthesilea or any Amazons. There's no like duel with Sarpedon, there's no Cassandra. There's not even Jocasta. Isn't it weird how it's like we have all these King Priam scenes?
It's Helen. Like Helen is the only woman, and like Andromache, but it's all Helen, and she's really annoying. I'm sorry, I know I keep like bringing this up, but they're so frustrating. And then Helen tries to sneak out the night before Paris's big duel that he goes so badly, and Hector's like, you can't go. It's going to do fuck all, and she's like, oh. Didn't think of that at all.
Yeah. Well, also, I highlighted that scene in my notes, and I was just like, why is this scene here? Because never in the poem is she ever, like, suddenly, like, conscience grips her, and she's like, I'm just gonna run away and not tell anybody and go back down the ships. Bye! So I'm like, why is this a scene here?
I don't know if they were trying to make Helen more sympathetic or more, like, I feel like in the poem she's pretty passive.
She is.
I don't know if they were trying to give her a little bit more like agency, substance. I mean, in the poem she's just this beautiful woman who kind of gets passed around to the most deserving king, I guess, which doesn't necessarily play terribly well with modern audiences. But that does kind of relate to my biggest, not problem, just the thing I noticed the most about the entire film is there's no gods. And I know this is very obvious, and it's something that I suspect gets brought up a lot when you have classicists and historians like looking to this at this film. But there are no gods. I mean, yes, you see Achilles' mom, but like she's an older woman, and it's not terribly explicit that she is divine. And then you have all of the statues of Apollo throughout Troy and at the temple, and I do understand that it's really difficult when you're doing visual depictions and like movie representations of ancient myth. Like, how do you get the gods in there without it being super cheesy? And it was clearly a conscious decision by the director, but I feel like you kind of, with Troy, you lose a lot of the impetus for most of the action, because the whole thing starts because of the gods, and then it's kind of continued because of the gods, because they say that this should be happening. And I think they did a very good job with Agamemnon, especially in like the very opening scenes where he's like, ha ha ha, you will all fight in my army and I am bigger than you and stronger than you, and also, have you met Achilles? He'll just kill you. I feel like they had to make him kind of the whole driving force behind. So Helen was the catalyst to start the war, but then Agamemnon was the reason it continued. And I do think it worked well. I think it was believable. He's a very unsympathetic character, like terribly, terribly unnice. Unnice is not a word. He's not a good person, or even like remotely, like I can't find any redeeming qualities. So that works in the whole motive. Like there's motive there, but I know I'd have liked a god or two just wandering around maybe.
I think it would have been hard to do all the interferences by the gods. I mean, and then, when you have some accounts saying, well, the gods were in physical human form fighting with the Greeks and the Trojans. Like, I understand that would be hard. But I think the one place for me where it would have benefited is the duel between Menelaus and Paris, only because the fact that they make him already sort of like simpering weakling, and then on top of it, because in the poem, he doesn't just like run away to Hector and that's it. Like, they're fighting, and how like Aphrodite like swoops down and basically carries him from the battlefield to his bed. and that's what like ends the duel. And so, I mean, I guess for the film, it wouldn't have worked narratively if they're like, no, we need Menelaus to die, and we need to give, have a reason, like why would he be dead? We can't have him just killed by an arrow. So you're like, oh, okay, that's fine. But it just, like, it makes an already kind of weakling, that you already despise even worse when he's like, I'm going to go hide behind my bro's legs.
And then bless him, he has to run back to get the Sword of Troy. I was kind of waiting for that to be taken by Agamemnon. As long as a Trojan holds it, the walls will hold. And then Agamemnon gets it, and you're like, well, shit. And it didn't happen. I was a little disappointed.
I was too, but also I'm like, LOL, there's no Sword of Troy in the real one. So I'm like, oh, what is this invention? Like, why put this in for anything other than I guess? But it's interesting to me because it plays into kind of a larger theme, which is like the fact that they don't loot the armor from the defeated foes. So I'm like, because in the poem, it's such a big deal that every time you defeat someone, you strip his, like when Hector kills Patroclus, he takes Achilles' armor. So Achilles is like, yo, I don't have my armor. It spoils war. And I'm just like, no, there's none of that. There's just, oh, okay.
No, it's funny watching movies like this as someone who has had some training in classics, because when I was halfway through my undergraduate degree, I couldn't watch things like this because it made me so frustrated. I was like, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and what are you doing? And it's all ridiculous, and that's not how the story happens. And then I took a class on like ancient history and popular media, and the professor was awesome. And the first lecture we had was centered around, don't look at it as accurate or inaccurate or wrong or correct. Look at it as, what are they taking from the ancient world and using, and why are they doing that? I mean, I still get frustrated because it's wrong. But also, like, some of it is just like the God thing, looking at why they don't use it. Like, is it a cinematic choice? Is it because that wouldn't play well with modern audiences because we have such different conceptions of deity and the divine? Or is it just like he didn't feel like doing it? It would be too complicated. And I suppose that's a cinematic reason. Anyway, yeah, I now am able to watch ancient history movies without getting apoplectic with rage.
I'm still learning that. It's getting there. There's some that are better than others, some that are like clearly historical and wrong, but if they're not like my wheelhouse, I'm like, okay, I'll take it for what it is.
It's a lot easier to kind of go with if you haven't studied it. Like Egyptian history, I know enough, like I can hang together the major events, but like I don't know much about ancient Egyptian culture, and the specifics aren't really something that would necessarily trip me up. So if I'm watching a movie or a TV show or something that has ancient Egyptian like plot lines, I just kind of sit back and enjoy myself because it doesn't trigger me.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I do that too. I mean, okay, my favorite example is the Gods of Egypt movie, that horrible one where they cast like no ethnically appropriate actors. So I was like, okay. Yeah. And I was like, this is so not anything close to reality at all. But you know what? I was like, I'm not an Egyptologist, so I will let it go. But another thing that I thought was kind of funny though, for this specific one, did you notice how they use the chariots all throughout the movie?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so the chariots, like for the most part, they like use them as ancient Ubers, basically, right? So you get in them and it takes you to where you go.
Point A to point B.
Exactly. And then they get off, they get down, and then they do their thing and they leave. And so historically, I'm like, yes, because chariots really were ancient Ubers. They would take you A to B, and then you get down, and then you do whatever, and you know, whatever. So I liked how they were correct in that, except then when you get to that first big battle scene after the end of the duel, when they sort of charge, they use the chariots to charge toward the wall into battle. And then I'm like, no, you don't. I'm like, ugh. I was like, yes, eventually the Greeks, not in the 8th century. I'm like, oh my gosh, guys. I'm like, this is a couple centuries too early. So I was like, this is definitely one of those where I was happy that it sort of did portray its intended like correct use, but then they took some liberty, and I'm like, okay, well, that would be a little hard to explain. Why did you have like 6 chariots, and then why not charge in? So But I was still just like, yeah, but they're just ancient Ubers, okay? They're not ancient Uber and then Warcraft. Yeah, that was pretty fun. It's interesting because they don't really try to allude to a lot of like historically correct ancient themes either. But I think one they did really well was that line where Menelaus, when he confronts Paris at the beginning, and then he has that line about what kind of man like violates another's hospitality. And I was like, oh my gosh, they don't want to like say it, but it's like a thing, guys. It's one of the biggest themes in like all of Greek mythology, which is either the violation of or extending like philoxenia. So I was like, oh, well, you didn't say it, but you sort of alluded to it.
But we know what you mean.
Exactly. So I was just like, oh, that must be like a little Easter egg for classicists, because it's like if you're not a classicist, you can still understand the violation of hospitality by, you know, stealing someone's wife after, you know, taking their stuff. But then as a classicist, you're like, yes, oh my God, they did. They slipped like Philoxenia, and how like he made a bigger deal out of violating hospitality than anything else. And I'm like, yes, and that's completely accurate, because that's what they would have actually been mad about.
That's the whole thing, yeah.
You know, that, and then the whole, yeah, Briseis thing. So, you know, stealing, you know, spoils of war also is a violation of like some kind of philoxenia. So I was like, no, good job. You did good. I don't know. I feel like I had so many stray thoughts watching this. Also because, I don't know, I feel like a bit responsible for analyzing this movie. Maybe wrongly, but only because Brad Pitt went to my school. So
did he?
He did. He's the most famous alum of University of Missouri to never graduate.
Oh, no. Mind you, I suppose if you're Brad Pitt, you don't necessarily need to have graduated from college.
It was so fun. Yeah, no, and then, well, another fun fact is that my freshman year, I met a girl who lived in my dorm. Her aunt was in the same class as Brad Pitt, and she said that her aunt went on a pity date with him their freshman year when he was like ugly, and I was like, no,
that's hilarious.
So
that's hilarious.
The classics department definitely always talks about, oh yeah, Brad Pitt went to our school and then he played it, yeah, and then he played Achilles, so ha ha ha, we need to like, you know, be the most critical.
Please give us more money to fund our students.
Exactly. So I don't know, so you know, we watch this and talk about it a lot. So beyond just reviewing it, I always have a lot of thoughts, like really stray random ones. Also, when you were talking about the Temple of Apollo, did you notice they had Egyptian pharaohs? And I was like, what is this doing here?
I think of a lot of the times when they do like ancient inspired movies, they just kind of, the set designers are like, okay, this looks old and this looks old and this looks old, so we'll just like mush them all together to make a generically old thing. And no one's really going to notice or tell the difference anyway. So we'll do that.
When they're clearly like, this is a temple to Apollo, and they make a big deal about it's Apollo's beach, and he desecrated the statue of Apollo, and then I'm just like, LOL, random pharaoh. Okay, cool, great. Like, keep going.
It's clearly a gift from like the pharaohs during the Amarna period. They sent it to Priam, and he just put it in his temple, and it's very plausible and legitimate.
I suppose. Also, did it bother you how like they pronounce half the names wrong?
So no, because I don't have enough experience with that side of things. I've never taken ancient Greek. A lot of my like classical education is, well, a long time ago. For starters, it was high school and then my undergraduate. So it was like 15 years ago at this point. But I will definitely bow to your superior knowledge on the pronunciation issues.
I should just say, if you're trying to adhere to the like original Greek, it's kind of like a mix where it could hew closer based on the spelling, where so like when Helen is like Menelaus's, you know, and not Menelaus, you know, then it's kind of like, okay, well, if you look at how the ancient Greek is spelled, you know, if you're gonna go for marketing to people who really don't know, you know, the characters and the names, you should go with the ones that are like universally kind of understood. Because then if you just say something like really weird, I feel like you'd be like, I think I know who that is. So I don't know. So, sometimes, I mean, I get, and sometimes I think maybe it was just the actor's own accents that might have contributed to how they would pronounce a name. Because Helen was over here saying Paris, and I'm just like, but it's Paris. But okay, sure. But you know, so I'm like, maybe that's just her like German accent. I mean, love you, Diane Kruger, but also like Paris. I was so annoyed. Ugh.
I think it would have been a better movie just without Helen and Paris. Just have Agamemnon crossing the seas to wreak havoc on Troy because he feels like it.
Yeah. That reminds me. Did you so for the funeral scenes, did you notice the like anachronistic elements in the Okay,
Go for it.
the coins, you know, that they put on the eyes?
Oh, yeah, the coins on the eyes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, for one, that was not a thing because you would, instead of 2 coins over each eye, it was 1 coin for the ferryman and you'd put it in their mouth. Like, you literally put it like in their mouth. And also, though, not only was the placement of the coin, if you wanted to include the coin, wrong, coins were not invented yet. Every time I see this, I'm like, well, one, the placement is wrong. I could forgive you, but I'm like, but coins literally came after. I'm like, guys, this is like the 8th century. Coinage was not a thing.
I feel like that's another kind of generically ancient thing that is floating around in the cultural milieu, and they're like, okay, well, we have to have coins to pay the ferryman because everyone knows you have coins to pay the ferryman. Like, no, not yet.
I was like, but yeah, not yeah. I was like, I just said it in a different time period then. So I was like, oh, okay, well, that's so nice. So yeah, the coins annoy me a lot just because they didn't exist, and anyone who did an inkling of research should have known.
See, I'm not sure that there was an awful... Well, I was going to say I'm not sure there was an awful lot of research. There was clearly, like, research, but I don't... Like, I keep saying, I don't think it was limited to a particular time. I think it was a general ancient Greek feel, kind of like window dressing. I'm trying to think of a good analogy.
But don't they put a date at, like, the very beginning?
They do, which was a poor choice.
They're like, Thessaly, and then date. So I was like, oh, okay, so you're clearly setting it. But I guess it just annoys me because the level of detail that they do put into some of the stuff that is right. Like, for the most part, I mean, I'm not an expert. Let me just go on record and say I'm not an expert in ancient warfare at all. That's not my thing. But from what I do remember learning about it is, yeah, they were right in the movie where no soldier had the same shield, because they would have their own family or whatever, like symbols, and so like all their armor sets should be different, which for the most part they were. And I'm like, yeah, that's all very good and accurate. And I'm like, okay, well, you need to do research to know that, because it would be easy to just kind of copy and paste the same, you know, military uniform. Now, some of the uniforms are a little too much of the same. Like all the Myrmidons had the same sort of black armor, and I was like, well, they wouldn't have really had that. And so, but you know, so that's another instance where I was like seeing a mix of like, oh, they do pay attention enough that all the shields were different, but then you have the matchy sort of breastplate and you know, greaves and whatever, and I'm like, okay, that breaks it a little bit. But you know, for the most part, like, that's a small level of detail. So that's why I get confused when I see that, and I'm like, okay, so you clearly did your research. So
I did find it, talking about costumes, I did find it interesting that they made the choice to have, like, almost all of the Trojan royal family in blue. Blue everywhere, lots of silver jewelry, and it looked like... It felt weirdly orientalizing.
Mm-hmm.
It was beautiful. I think the costumes were gorgeous, but I don't know if it was we're making these men look effeminate, especially in like Paris being this like weak ladies man type thing, so we want that to be carried on through the rest of the Trojans, or if it was just we need them visually distinct from the Greeks, who are like always in their damn armor, so let's have the Trojans in super bright colors and wearing lots of jewelry. And yeah, that was interesting.
It was. I mean, it suited Paris, I would think, but let me just be honest. Eric Bana rocking that armor, I was like, hello.
Oh my god, yes.
I was like, I'm okay with this. This is a good choice.
He was easily like the most
likable character.
Yeah, honorable, wanting to protect his family and his homeland, and you can tell he wants to just smack Paris. He's not going to, because he's his brother and he's going to protect Helen, but also you two are goddamn idiots. Why did you do this? And then he obviously dies horribly. And I mean, he's one of the really tragic figures of the poem, I think. And they carried that forward really very well. And it definitely doesn't hurt that Eric Bana is very easy on the eyes.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You know, I just want to stare at him whenever he's on screen. He's just magnetic. But also, I'm kind of like, but him being, make Hector live.
He could just escape. Well, the thing is, because of like the character he is, I don't think he'd have done the escaping thing. He'd have stayed behind to like cover everyone's retreats and then been killed tragically anyway.
That's true. I mean, okay, well, with the escape, the fact that Paris pulled some random boy and was like, "What's your name?" And he's like, "Aeneas." And he's just like, "Oh, okay, here's the sword of Troy. Go forth and save. Bye." I mean, we talk about all these main characters dying, so people who might have read, like, the Iliad or be familiar with the original might know, okay, it's inaccurate that all these people die. But I also wanted to point out, I found it quite interesting that for non-classicists, it's still popular enough that some people will be familiar, but, you know, when we think of Trojan women in Euripides, clearly all the women of Troy go back to Greece and have all these very different fates, and it's quite famous what happens to them. So I found it interesting that Andromache and Helen and Hector's son Astyanax, who famously doesn't get thrown off the turrets, but like survives and is carried out through the secret tunnel, which also
No.
What? There was no secret tunnel in the Iliad. I'm sorry. Do you remember them being like, there's a secret tunnel for everyone to get out? I mean, the only description of people like fleeing the city, and not even through a tunnel, just freaking fleeing, is the Aeneid. So I'm like, this was quite an interesting choice to be like, oh yes, we have a secret passageway, and all these famous women who are captured and have these different fates, no, they get out through the secret tunnel.
They have to make it a happy ending somehow, though.
But is it really happy? Like, they lose their home and, you know, their position, and Paris living bothers the shit out of me.
Yeah. Just out of all of the male characters in that whole movie, I mean, my dislike of Paris is well documented by this stage, but he should have, like, not been alive afterwards.
I mean, it also bothers me because, I mean, obviously, as we've established now, the record on characters living and dying is not great.
A little bit blurry.
But, like, okay, to be fair, it's not actually in the Iliad, but we do know from other, like, stories and sources that Philocrates kills Paris basically after he kills Achilles. So I'm kind of like, so you killed all these people and then you didn't show that, like, Paris is actually killed?
And that would have been, like, weirdly poetic justice in the movie. Like, he kills Achilles and then it could even just be like a random soldier throws a spear and Paris is down here like, well, maybe don't steal other people. I mean, and again, he didn't steal her, but like...
But I'm like, what message is this sending when, like, so you kidnap you just bring along another man's wife and then you kill her, like, first husband, and then you're rewarded because you get to live and, like, escape with her? Like, what kind of messed up romance is this? I'm sorry.
But and I guess at the heart of it, that is my overriding problem with this movie. Historical inaccuracies, you know, we can live with those. It's artistic license, sure. They've taken the Iliad and they've tried to make it into a love story. And they tried to make it into two love stories, because then you have Briseis and Achilles as well. And it's just, it's not terribly well done, because Paris and Helen are so unsympathetic as characters. Like, I don't think anyone likes them. And I feel if you have to have a successful love story, you kind of have to be rooting at the heart. You've got to be rooting for this couple to actually succeed. And throughout the whole of it, I'm like, you two should not be together. I mean, like, aside from the whole misogyny, patriarchal bullshit of women being used as political pawns, okay, I think we can accept, all of us, that is not a good thing, and it is not something we wish to see replicated, but it's how things were. But I never really felt like it was actually... Like, it just didn't feel right. They didn't feel like they were actually in love. It felt like this performative, like, I've been at your husband's house for 4 days and you're super sexy, so we're going to have sex, and then maybe you should come home with me. And then later Paris is like, Father, I love her like you love every single blade of grass in Troy and every stone in the river. And I'm like, bitch, you've known her 2 damn weeks. I am all for love at first sight, theoretically, but it doesn't happen like that. That kind of deep-rooted emotion doesn't just magically spring up because she's pretty. They came across like love-struck 14-year-olds, and I'm like, this is not worth fighting a whole war over. And if you have the gods like manipulating the whole thing, it makes a lot more sense, because sure, he's been given this woman and the gods have decreed that she's his now, and okay, it's bullshit, but like, it's more convincing and more compelling than those two actually being in love, and that love being worth a 10-year war. It's not a love story, and it doesn't track as one. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant, wasn't it?
I love your rants because they're always so spot on and hilarious.
And then you have Briseis falling in love with Achilles, and I'm like, he's killing literally your entire country. And he's doing it because he wants to be famous. And yes, the immortality of one's name was a big thing in the ancient world. Sure, we've got Gilgamesh, we've got people writing about it for millennia. But I mean, is that really a good enough reason to forgive him for killing everyone, especially your beloved cousin, and then falling in love with him? Again, 14-year-old star-crossed lovers vibe. And yeah, maybe I'm just not the target audience. I feel like this plays a lot better when you're maybe not 34 with several children and you've kind of seen a bit of the world. Like, if I was in high school, this would feel much more plausible. Be like, of course, you love this person, you are going to like follow them across the ocean. And I have to say, as someone who has followed a partner across the ocean, it's not an awful, like, it's not an easy thing to do. That's not how it works. I'm very sorry, but no, absolutely not.
I mean, to be fair, I basically was a high schooler when I first saw it. Let's see, it came out in like 2004. Yeah, this movie came out in 2004, and I was in high school. I might have seen it before, but either way, I was of high school age because I was in high school from like 2009 to 2013. So I was perfectly in the wheelhouse.
When did I leave high school? It's a good question.
Yeah, great question.
How old am I? I think I said 34. I think I'm 36. I don't know anymore.
What is time? What is age?
It's imaginary.
Time is a construct, though.
Yeah, so I left school in 2004. So actually, I was 18 when this came out.
Oh, okay. See, right. Well, I'm 26, almost 27. But still, I'm like, okay, I would have been in the target age range probably. Nah, it still didn't play as a better love story. I'm still just like, these guys are fucking annoying and I hate them. And I was like, this is wrong. And it was like, honestly, the best love story in the whole movie was Hector and Andromache. And they got, 2 seconds of screen time?
Yeah, they were lovely. And Hector made his son that little lion figure, and I was like, that looks like the lion from the Gates of Hattusha. And I don't know if it's supposed to be, but it's super cool, and I love it. And yeah, that's a compelling love story right there. I'd have watched the fuck out of that movie if it was Hector and Andromache.
That's the movie I want to see, guys. Someone in Hollywood, please make that one.
The Iliad from like their perspective, maybe with like some how they met, and yeah, that'd be nice.
That would be much, much better. Yes. Also, the fact that they misnamed his son. Did you even pick up what the hell his name was? Because there's that one.
No, I didn't. I remember thinking I don't think that's right, but I don't remember.
No, because like there's the one scene where he comes. Oh yeah, he comes back from Sparta at the beginning of the movie. And she's like all there and pretty and like, here's your son. And he's like, my son. And so I don't know actually what this kid's name is, but from what I picked up just from listening really hard, it sounded like he said Scrown. He's like, Scrown.
It's a good solid Trojan name right there.
And I was like, did he just say Scrown? This kid has a documented name, okay? It's Astyanax, and, he famously gets, thrown off the walls of Troy when they lose. But that one I'm kind of like, come on, you at least got the names of most everyone else right. Why did you not get his son's name correct? I don't.
I like Scrown though. I think I'm going to I'm not having another child, but if I do, we're naming them Scrown.
You could get a cat or a dog and name it Scrown.
Scrown. That's a good name for a dog. Actually, that's a good yelling name. Scrown, heel, sit. Bad dog, Scrown. Yeah, it's not the name of a Trojan prince though.
No. I was like, but his name is STNX, and I'm like, okay. So yes, that just makes me just.
Also, going back to the pronunciation thing, I think American classicists and British classicists pronounce some names differently, because hearing American classicists talk occasionally, I'm like, is that how you pronounce that? And I assume yes, because they would know, but also it's definitely not the pronunciation that I remember from college. So sometimes I'm not sure if it's a cultural classicist difference or if it's someone actually mispronouncing a word.
No, I've learned, especially after I started podcasting, I've learned that there is quite a difference, not only in like pronunciation, but also in spellings. So fun fact, when I spell archaeology, I always spell it with the A, because I'm like, that's how you spell it, it's like archaeology. Apparently I saw a bunch of people spelling it archaeology just with the E, no A, and I was like, what is this word? Who would spell it this way? So I looked it up one day, and they were like, oh, that's how American archaeologists spell the name of their field. It's just archaeology. And I'm like, no, wait, what?
Incorrect.
Excuse me? This is like disgusting.
Absolutely not okay. Do not approve.
So no, absolutely just no. If you spell it archaeology, I'm going to give you a very, very dirty look, and then proceed to just sort of go, sure, and then take everything you say with a grain of salt. So. But that got me so curious. So wait, like what is like a name that is pronounced differently?
See, now I can't actually give you an example because my brain has decided that we're not playing that game today. I'll try and find some though in the next episode. I'll be like, so these words are very different in British classicist language and American classicist language, and it'll make more sense. But
okay. Perfect. Well, I'm sure everyone will be very excited to know how differently we pronounce things. I've been listening to Natalie Haynes' A Thousand Ships audiobook because I love it, and it's like the best audiobook I have. And she says Calliope, and that's not how we would pronounce it in the States.
How would you say it?
Calliope.
Oh.
Yeah. There's one.
No, that's weird. Yes. No.
Yeah.
Calliope.
Yeah. So we would always say Calliope, and I'm always like, I mean, I guess I heard it enough that it's not like it's different, but to me it's not like weird.
It's odd, but it's not like totally jarring.
But I guess for you, you're probably like, what is it? That sounds like some weird like plant.
I just assume I'm remembering something incorrectly. It's just me being forgetful, and sometimes it's actually not. It's just pronounced differently.
Yeah, I'm sure there's more, but I guess, okay, so one thing I did want to mention is, so the timeline of the whole movie, I know they have to move fast and they want the biggest entertainment value, but the timeline, so the fact that we kind of start with Agamemnon vaguely unifying as much of mainland Greece as he could, which I find laughable because I'm like, LOL, when was mainland Greece ever a unified anything? Never. So the fact that he was like the Achaeans and the whatever, they all fight for me. I'm like, no, because Greece. I even in like the opening like little subtitled whatever. It's like they're almost a unified Greek state. Agamemnon just needs to like conquer Thessaly, and I was like, Greece was never a unified Greek state. So that annoyed me. But then so it starts there. So it clearly starts before, and then you have the whole Helen goes, and then they get angry, and so then they skip over the sacrifice of Iphigenia, which I think is like, but that's so central. And
it is, but again, it is a requirement of the gods, so if you don't have the gods, you don't have that requirement. And I suspect a Hollywood movie can't really show the sacrifice of a child.
True. I mean, they could have aged her up, but yeah, true.
Human sacrifice, though, generally. I mean, Indiana Jones did it, I guess, but that was very much, especially because the people who, in Indiana Jones, the people who did the human sacrifice were the baddies. So you can't have purportedly goodies. I mean, again, Agamemnon is total dick throughout the whole thing, but he's like, I think human sacrifice would probably be a bridge too far.
Well, even if they didn't show it, I feel like they could have alluded to it, and he's such an unlikable prick that I feel like he could have just been like, and you don't even you could honestly have said you could have like avoided the whole it's a requirement by the gods. You could have just been you could have made him like a dickweed who was like, I wanted a fair wind, so instead of sacrificing cattle, I sacrificed my daughter. And like you could have had him just say it, like mention that it happened.
Right, yeah, that's true. That would have been like a good compounding of how unpleasant he is. Because he clearly has no regard for human life, probably has no regard for women, generally speaking. I mean, obviously doesn't, given how he treats Briseis, but yeah, that would have worked.
I mean, because clearly they wanted to make him a character that, you know, like, I don't know. Because if you're going to kill him at the end and you really want people to root for it, I guess he was so unlikable anyway that, yeah, okay, I probably would have been like, yeah, he's dead, woo! But, like, if they'd really wanted me to, like, hate him, then, you know, have him, like, sacrifice his daughter. So I found that quite interesting. And then, yeah, you have the whole ending of the movie, which isn't even in the poem at all. But you still have the Trojan horse, and you're like, okay. Because, like, the poem ends basically after, like, the funeral games of Patroclus. So I'm like, okay, sure.
Again, though, I think that's a public perception because everyone, like, the thing everyone knows about Troy is the Trojan horse. And I suspect having a movie called Troy and no horse would upset some people.
It would upset some people, but it would be a great way in sort of, like, dispelling, like, gross misconception, like, because this would have been their chance, right, where you're like, it is the Trojan War, but, like, we do want to let you know, like, it can be entertaining. Because I guess the if I were to, like, recap what on earth this poem is, if I were to watch the movie, I'd be like, at its core, the Iliad is a romance about, you know, someone who just, like,
two really annoying teenagers.
Exactly, who were star-crossed lovers. And so, and then it was also a pseudo-romance of a captured priestess slave and her, more like
owner.
Yeah, I don't even know what I would say.
Which doesn't make it sound, well, it makes it sound like what it is.
Yeah. So if I just watched the movie and knew nothing about it, I would be like, yeah, no, the Iliad is all it's a couple romances and some fighting. And if you're a classicist, you'd sit here and basically say the entire book is literally a tiff between two man children, and it's one pouting and one being like, no, I don't want to do this because you've insulted me and you violated my fellow Xenia, my guest friendship, my hospitality, and my presence. So, you know, I'm like, ugh. Like, so the whole poem is basically about their feud. There's like not really a romance. I mean, they just kind of were like, well, this is the pretext for the war, whatever. But, like, so I just find it really interesting how the entire marketing and the popular perception we have is helped along by these things that are propagating these things that are very, very wrong.
Incorrect.
I don't know about you, but I'd be like, hey, if you wanted to market a movie to me that, like, almost demigod fighter who cannot be killed except for, like, a little arrow through his heel, and then the other man baby is, like, just happens to be the king of one of the most powerful, like, ancient Mycenaean city-states, and, you know, he can, like, control the lives of, like, thousands of people. Ha ha ha, let's see what happens. I would watch it. I would watch that. Like, I literally would. I'd be like, I want to see man babies.
Troy, the man baby edition.
Not only is, like, the timeline compounded and then the marketing is off, but then they just talk about the Greeks and the Trojans being two different things, but then they never really go into, but where really is Troy? Like, what ethnicity are, like, were they all kind of Greeks, just, like, from different parts? Or, like, are one, like, completely foreigners because they're city-states, you know? So I was kind of like, there's nothing really that tells us anything other than, okay. And then Yeah, along with that like orientalizing thing that they did to Troy. I think it's really funny. I don't know if you had this thought, but the whole time they were showing shots and scenes within Troy, I kept thinking to myself, this looks like Babylon.
Yeah. The walls, I was like, interesting. And then the palaces, I was like, interesting. Yeah.
Not even that, but there's a shit ton of gardens and reflecting pools. Like the only thing they got right in that entire city was like the archaic statue of Apollo, and he's like the only one.
That jumped out at me, actually. It didn't seem to fit with the rest of the scenery.
Yeah, same with Sparta. I mean, you don't get a good look at them because they're kind of in the background, but like in the scenes of the feasting hall when Menelaus is like toasting the guests, the artwork behind him looked very Assyrian to me, and I was like, why is there Assyrian art in Sparta? I'm sorry, I'm very confused.
Show their barbaric nature. Clearly, the Spartans have rejected all the gods. They're going like Assyrian warmongering directions, and Priam is like the most pious man in the whole history of ever, so they have god statues everywhere.
Yeah, that tracks. Priam was always described as being quite devout, so I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Priam definitely dies. I don't remember at this very moment, but I feel like I think I have these vague memories of like, I think he like commits suicide when he locks himself in the inner rooms of the palace, and he was just like, oh no, my city is burning. He's like the captain of his ship where he's just like, okay, well, Troy is burning and no one's really getting out, or if they are, they're getting out on their own time. So I'm going to lock myself in the room and bye. So I felt that was quite interesting. Yeah. And I guess the only other really big point, the rest is just like smaller classes details that only classicists would probably really care about or notice, that stood out though was Nestor. Nestor is like another king, but I found it really interesting that they never clarify who he is or whatever, other than, but like they have him become like an advisor to Agamemnon, and I'm like, I mean, yes, they kind of advised, but strategized as equals, kind of.
As equals, not as subordinates.
But you just have this old man with a white beard just being like, yes, my king, if you do this, you do this. If you don't want this, you do this. Like, I was like, so they made him seem like a servant. And I'm like, yeah, but Nestor actually plays a really important role in the original source material. So I was like, you didn't want to just, maintain that? I have questions. I mean, I guess it's not a big deal, but, by the time they're like camped on the beach of Troy and in his, what was it, tent ship? I was like, ship tent? What is this? No one else has this.
Isn't this wildly impractical?
I was like, okay then. Okay.
We're just we're not questioning it. We're just ship tent. It's a thing now.
It's a thing. His ship tent. Yeah, so, and then I don't know, the Trojans are literally trying to burn the ships down by, like, shooting fire arrows at it, and I'm like, but your treasure would burn if it was really kept there, but you keep it here anyway.
You're sitting on the most flammable thing you could be, with all of your precious objects piled next to you.
Yeah.
Maybe not the best plan.
Yeah.
I'm not a military strategist, but,
Yeah.
Strikes me as less than wise.
Yes. Also, I guess the last note I'd made on my paper, because I'd like underlined it like 4 times, was I just wrote LOLOL Patroclus, my cousin.
Yeah, he was, yeah. I mean, uninspiring generally, but also
I felt like that was the movie's version of, and they were roommates.
Yes, they were just really good friends. Really good friends, yeah.
They were best friends, inseparable friends, who happened to sort of maybe not. Yes. So we've been criticizing it basically for an hour, but is there anything nice you do want to actually compliment about this movie before people think that we actually just hate it? Which I don't. I want to be very clear.
No, I mean, I think it's a good like solid sword and sandal epic type thing. It's very well shot. I enjoyed the costumes, historical inaccuracies aside. I think Brad Pitt did an excellent job as Achilles. I think he gets that whole ruthless warrior, really the only thing I'm here for is to make a name for myself thing very nicely. I feel like Agamemnon, I can't remember the actor's name who played Agamemnon. He was fantastic.
Oh, Brian Cox.
Yes, he did again, beautiful job. Very, very believable, very unlikable. And like, again, perfect as the driving force behind the whole war when you don't have the gods present. No, I enjoy it. It's a fun movie. It's not, is it like my all-time favorite? No, but I enjoyed myself. It's definitely one I will watch again. How about you?
Yeah, I think the one thing that stood out to me the whole way is, for the most part, other than... But see, that's the thing. I hated their characters, is for Paris and Helen. But the thing is, I think the movie was brilliantly casted because they did the intended job, which is,
yes,
I don't think I would want
I don't think you're supposed to like them.
Right, and I was like, I don't think... Because if you cast someone who was more handsome or better, like whatever, as Paris, then maybe I don't hate him because I'm like, oh no, he's just too good looking, so I love him. So Orlando Bloom just tapped into that, like, pouty, young little princeling who's kind of a weakling, and, so he makes you hate him, and Helen being unlikable as well. So they do a great job of making you not like them. I always maintain that, yes, Brian Cox as Agamemnon is like the best casting choice that could have been done. I loved Brendan Gleeson as Menelaus because I think that also is I love their dynamic, those two actors. So I was like, oh, they were believable brothers. And I would say the other standout for me, other than Sean Bean as Odysseus, is what's his name as Priam. Oh my God, he's such a famous actor. He's so famous. What the hell is his name?
Peter O'Toole.
Thank you. Very famous British actor. So I loved him because I specifically highlighted the scene in the tent where he goes to beg Achilles for Hector's body. And I just remember thinking, this is a fantastic scene. I mean, he really captures that like fatherly, like, this is my son, you are my enemy, but we can show respect. And he's like the picture of like a calm and, sage kind of old man. And I was like, oh man, this is fantastic. So he would be my standout. But yeah, no, it was fantastically cast, and I really appreciate that the actors gave it their all and so clearly fit their roles. And honestly, I would have loved to see this cast, honestly, in other adaptations. Because I remember thinking, like, when I watched the new Netflix miniseries Troy, the actors were fine. I liked them, but I would have taken the cast from this one and put it maybe into that one.
I want a Sean Bean Odyssey.
Oh, I do too. Can we have that next, please? I want somebody.
That would be nice.
Somebody make that.
That would be nice.
Somebody make that.
On that hopeful note, I think that's probably all we have time for today. But audience, if you think we are being unfair to this movie, you should definitely let us know. And also, if you enjoyed Helen and Paris, I mean, A, what's wrong with you? Sorry, that was rude. But, like, why did you like them? What is it that we're missing? Leave us a note. If you plan on joining us next week, we are going to be discussing the first 2 episodes of the Netflix miniseries, Troy, Fall of a City. And if you've enjoyed this, maybe consider leaving us a positive review, because that really helps the podcast reach other people.
Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review, and you can also follow us on social media at The Reading Party Podcast. If you'd like to leave us a book or movie suggestion, then email us at thereadingpartypod@gmail.com. See you next week.